In recent years, exhibitions and books of criticism have renewed interest in the life and art of Anton Gåg, the Minnesota painter, photographer, and fresco artist. His works date from 100 years ago, and to celebrate that centennial anniversary, over 100 of his landscapes, history paintings, still lifes, portraits, and photographs have been gathered for this video presentation, the most comprehensive representation of his work to date. Anton Gåg was born in 1858 in a small village in the German-speaking western rim of Bohemia, which was then a province of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and is now part of the Czech Republic. He immigrated at age 14 to America with his family and settled in New Ulm, Minnesota. Anton displayed a love of the natural surroundings of his new home in southwestern Minnesota in his earliest landscape image from an 1878 sketchbook, and in later undated paintings of the Minnesota and Cottonwood rivers, in which he reveals himself as an accomplished painter firmly within the tradition of American academic impressionism. As many American painters, from Albert Bierstadt to Thomas Hart Benton, had done before him and after him, Anton celebrated his natural environment in all its unadorned beauty, from the first stirrings of spring to the full flush of summer, with water lilies in bloom and a cow seeking refuge from the heat, to a lone canoeist on a peaceful summer afternoon. One of Anton's most accomplished paintings, from around 1890, is a river scene which he also photographed. In this masterful work, the simple activity of herding cows is imbued with heroic dignity, much in the manner of painters of the French Barbizon school, such as Jules Breton and Jean-François Millet, artists whose work would have been known to Anton through his days in art school in Chicago. The influence of other prominent Barbizon painters, such as Camille Corot, can be seen in this river landscape, and in Anton's painting of a little bridge crossing the Cottonwood River, as well as the influence of Henri Rousseau in this woodland view. However, the Barbizon painters were by no means the only influence on Anton. For example, this haunting, gloomy seascape brings to mind the work of the symbolist painter Albert Pinkham Ryder. This painting was one of 4 Anton did at art school in Chicago, prior to his return home in 1880 or 1881. It is not known if Anton visited the North Shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota, but he is known to have copied other paintings. And several experts on geology of the shore suggest that this work, although fanciful to be sure, is similar to other late 19th century compositions showing a promontory called Gold Rock Point, before the famous Split Rock Lighthouse in the background was built in 1909. Upon his return to New Ulm, Anton established himself as a professional artist. He painted townscapes and fulfilled commissions from prominent friends and townspeople in the region, such as the home of Michael Lehrer in Springfield, Minnesota. He painted landmarks, such as the Iberia Mill, and a view said by his family to have been inspired by memories of the countryside, people, and village in his native Bohemia. With a love of nature never far from his work, Anton continued to paint pastoral scenes, as well as highly impressionistic glimpses into the surrounding woods, filled with the immediacy of a snapshot in time. Natural phenomena caught his eye, such as a vein of quartz along the Minnesota River, and a rocky slope reflecting the late afternoon sunset, allowing him to transform mundane vistas into scenes of quiet, understated beauty. Human interaction with nature could be another source of inspiration, as in his painting of a brook that runs through a stone culvert. More often, however, Anton preferred nature in her simple splendor, as in an uncomplicated view of the rolling countryside, or a cluster of trees beside a field. Such paintings are spare and yet strong in their deep horizontality, Such work by Anton is very reminiscent of that by another prominent Minnesota artist, Alexis Fournier. In 1906, Anton visited Oregon for a few weeks in hopes of improving his health. He applied his love of a strong horizontal vista to new surroundings, the coastal wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. As a boy, living briefly in St. Paul, Minnesota, Anton had sketched what he saw in his neighborhood from an upstairs window. Now in Oregon and coming full circle, Anton's last paintings were of similar rooftops, this time dictated by the need to remain confined to his room as he painted since he was ill with tuberculosis. Within 2 years of this trip, Anton would be dead, at age 49, at home in New Ulm, a community which the newspaper said was just beginning to appreciate Mr. Gåg at his true worth. While landscape was undoubtedly Anton's first artistic love, historical views and narrative compositions proved the subject of many of his most important civic commissions, often the lifeblood and economic mainstay of painters in this time period. One of his most important New Ulm commissions in 1901 was to design the main curtain for the Turner Hall's new theater. Only a watercolor study of the curtain survives. He chose to represent the picturesque town of Hallstatt in Bavaria, which is near Bohemia, and rendered it with all the romantic nostalgia of a true expatriate. When Anton's original watercolor was presented to the Brown County Historical Society in 1954, the newspaper reported that he had gotten the idea for his composition from a picture of the castle of Chillon on Lake Geneva in Switzerland, which was his colleague Chris Heller's homeland. For the drop curtain at the rear of the Turner Hall stage, Anton chose a woodland scene of Myers Creek outside New Ulm, demonstrating his love of the natural surroundings of his adopted home. Not surprisingly, narrative or figurative paintings would ultimately be the paintings that brought Anton the most renown during his own time. His training in Chicago prepared him well for this, as exemplified in this work around 1880 of the 5 classical muses from Greek mythology: tragedy, painting, music, astronomy, and poetry. While certainly an early student work, Anton showed an understanding of French neoclassical painting and arranged the figures in an animated yet well-balanced composition, based on multiple picture planes receding into the distance, creating the appropriate atmospheric perspective. The proper human figural proportions and classical color harmonies were also a result of his training, which would have involved exposure to French neoclassicism and later Romanticism, the chief academic styles of the day. Above all, Anton showed in his early classical paintings the ability to tell a story on canvas. In Hero and Leander, he captured all the drama of another scene from Greek mythology, as he rendered the moment when Hero, a priestess of Aphrodite, discovers her lover Leander has drowned while swimming the Hellespont to visit her. The unnatural shade of the water appears reflected in the dead man's skin, lifting the drama to the level of the macabre, which is reminiscent of the firestorm created by the great French romantic painter Theodore Géricault, who some years earlier, in 1819, scandalized French society with his famous Raft of the Medusa. Perhaps from his memories of gardens, people, and the artistic style of his homeland, Anton painted another classical composition, heavily symbolic in its motifs of motherhood in the statuary above, Dionysus in relief below, and summertime resplendent in the arbor all around. The male figure might well be a romanticized self-portrait of the artist himself. Exotic locations, people, and animals were favorite subjects of Theodore Géricault and his protégé, Eugène Delacroix, and it is highly likely that Anton had these artists, or paintings by them, in mind when he created a charming yet mysterious painting of a lion's head. Nothing short of portrait-like, it is a very individualistic, bust-like rendering of the animal as he stares out from the picture frame, every bit as dignified as an elder statesman. At the very least, this was an exercise by the artist in capturing on canvas the unmistakable essence of an animal, whether as a practice for a later larger composition or for some unknown symbolic reason we may never know. Inspirations for another painting from this period are not so mysterious, however. The content for Anton's Death of Minnehaha was based on Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's famous poem, Song of Hiawatha, recounting the death of Minnehaha during a famine. Anton's painting is a direct copy of a composition by William de Leftwich Dodge, a painter and muralist from Virginia. In 1886, at age 19, Dodge was awarded the gold medal of the American Art Association for this painting. And it is highly likely Dodge's painting and Anton's copy were based on another famous 19th century French romantic painting, The Burial of Attila, by Anne-Louis Giraudet de Roussay-Triosson. Giroudet's painting illustrated a scene from François-René de Chateaubriand's famous novel Attila. Giroudet's painting was done in 1813 and was widely known by Anton's time. The compositions are set in a cave, the mouth of which provides a view to the outside. The tragic young women in the paintings are draped in white, and for the figure of Hiawatha, Giroudet's own figure of Choctaws, also doubled over in grief. Anton's German Bohemian heritage provided him with the narrative subject of Hermann the Cheruscan, who united the Germanic tribes to defeat the Roman army in 9 A.D. This symbol for German nationalism was ripe for romantic reproduction. In 1897, a statue was installed in New Ulm to commemorate the hero, and Anton responded with a painting to go with it. Closer to home is the famous First Battle of New Ulm, which was one of his most important commissions. The 7 by 10-foot painting documented one of the assaults on the town during the Dakota conflict of 1862. The painting was on display at the Minnesota exhibit of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, later sold to a man in Mankato, then donated to the Minnesota Historical Society, hung in a meeting room at the state capitol in St. Paul. By 1893, a Minnesota map was made by Anton, Chris Heller, or Alexander Schwiniger, with a strong sloping line through the middle, stressing the Minnesota River Valley locations where many events took place in the Dakotas War with settlers and the U.S. Army. The map was the first panel of 11 by the 3 artists as historical documentation of the conflict, a series of narrative paintings that went on display at their studio in February 1893. The first picture is titled Attack on the Redwood Agency, August 18, 1862, showing a community of traders attacked by a band of Santee Sioux who had gone to war because of injustices perpetrated by some of the settlers and the American government. Next in the series is the attack on Fort Ridgely, where the Dakota chief Little Crow sits wounded after defeat by soldiers and citizens. The fourth painting shows the Second Battle of New Ulm, when in late afternoon of August 23rd, an attack from many directions was repulsed by townspeople. Flight from New Ulm to Mankato refers to the August 25th evacuation of settlers under protection. Another depiction of flight showed the effort of outlying settlers to escape to Fort Ridgely or New Ulm as confrontation ensued with Dakota warriors up and down the river valley. Battle of Birch Coulee documented an event along the Minnesota River in which nearly half of the 200 soldiers under command of Major Joseph Renshaw Brown were killed or wounded at dawn on September 2nd before Colonel Henry H. Sibley's troops came to the camp's rescue. In the Battle of Acton on September 3rd, Anton fully exploited his training in the classical narrative tradition, masterfully rendering some of the most historically significant events in New Ulm's history, and as a result established himself as one of Minnesota's most important history painters. At the camp release on September 22nd, 269 prisoners were delivered by 3 chiefs. These paintings were all 7 feet tall by 10 feet wide and were done on a single roll of canvas. Together they comprise a rare early Minnesota example of a type of panorama called a cyclorama, a style of mural that was unwound, panel by panel, from vertical rollers at each end of its large continuous strip of fabric. The return to New Ulm showed some of the settlers as they came back to town. The melodramatic style of panorama painters was that of a staged presentation, and their large-scale canvases were often taken from town to town as a popular traveling show, often complete with music, commentary, and admission fees. The last in the series showed a dark day in Minnesota's history, the December 26th mass hanging in Mankato of 38 Dakota out of 392 who were tried. Water-stained and in poor condition, the canvas was purchased, stored, and its panels photographed by the Minnesota Historical Society. Also in 1892, Anton executed a drawing of Fort Ridgely as it had once been. Anton again pictured the defenders standing behind their barricade during the First Battle of New Ulm, this time on a flour barrel cover. Again, barricaded townspeople were rendered by Anton in a 1902 painting that survives today only as photographed. Another 1902 work, titled The Leavenworth Rescue Expedition, is also available only as photographed. It depicts a group of settlers riding in a thunderstorm through the Dakota lines on August 19th. Traditionally trained artists of the 19th century painted still lifes to hone their skills in reproducing naturalistic detail. Florals, such as this study of roses, were a perfectly respectable, and indeed expected, portion of a professional painter's body of work. The great Dutch still life painters had elevated this type of painting to the highest level, with large-scale, awe-inspiring compositions of highly realistic flowers, often with insects and other details. Henri Fontaine-Latour, the great 18th century French still life painter, was more restrained than the Dutch in his floral compositions, which were often based on deep red, pink, and white roses, as are some of Anton's. Fontaine-Latour's luxurious flower pieces influenced generations of painters in European schools, which, in turn, influenced American artists, and undoubtedly reached Anton and his companions. Floral arrangements in vases silhouetted against a simple backdrop allowed artists to practice the effect of light and shadow, as well as reflections on glass. Anton demonstrated the lesson was well learned. A less formal close-up by Anton fills the canvas in an explosion of color. Not only were these attractive works useful exercises in rendering naturalistic detail, but they undoubtedly found a ready market. With female patrons desiring beautiful decoration for their parlors or private sitting rooms, sometimes called boudoirs. Still lifes of fruit also seem to have appealed to Anton. Only one formal painting is known to exist, with excellent rendering of reflections on 2 glass bowls. But over half a dozen informal studies remind art historians today of the work of Curtius Plantagenet Rehm, Chicago's most famous still life painter during this period, and someone Anton certainly could have known during his stay in that city, as well as the earlier still life painters Rembrandt and Raphael Peale. In the tradition of these painters, Anton reveled in the play of light on small translucent orbs, whether spilling from a farmer's basket or hanging from a string attached to a windowsill, clear proof that the objective was to capture the effect of light on form. Although another version reveals that the effect could also be achieved against a solid wood backdrop and additionally provide an interesting trompe-l'oeil effect, similar to another great American still life painter from this period, William Harnett. Other fruit, such as raspberries tumbling from a crate, and ripe plums spilling from a basket, or simply alone on sun-splashed grass, also caught Anton's eye as he sought the unadorned beauty of nature once again. That Anton preferred nature unstaged and manipulated by man could explain the fact that only one example of another popular type of still life, the hunting still life, exists in his body of work. While certainly an accomplished painting, very probably done on commission, this one seems out of place for a man who gloried so in the natural world. Although Anton used state-of-the-art techniques in his photography, in his church and other decorative work, he remained true to his old-world artistic heritage. He and his friends, Chris and Alex, as very young men, had decorated the walls in their short-lived art school in downtown New Ulm with Rococo murals. And on the ceiling and walls of his own home, for Anton, the need to decorate the built environment seemed to come quite naturally. Even one of his floral paintings was embellished with ornate Art Nouveau and Orientalist-inspired three-dimensional or relief borders which were in vogue at the turn of the century. In 1895, when Anton and Chris partnered in the decorating of churches, Anton painted an example of art the new firm could offer its clients. One of their first commissions was for St. Patrick's Church in West Albany, Minnesota, where they based murals on Italian Renaissance painting. The 4 ceiling decorations included the Nativity, the Transfiguration, the Descent into Hell, and the Assumption of Mary. An even more important commission for the Heller and Gåg decorating studio was Holy Trinity Catholic Church in New Ulm, which resulted in a decidedly different style of fresco. Painted in conventional Old World traditions, Anton, Chris, and their workmen, and sometimes Alex, worked for several months in 1903 to mirror the splendor of the high Baroque altar that dominated the sanctuary. The Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, surrounded by saints, Renaissance-inspired angels, and cherubim, occupy the grand fresco behind the altar and exhibit once again the painter's knowledge of the world's great fresco painters who had preceded them. In addition to such large-scale decorative projects, which provided much-needed income and prestige, Anton also found time to paint charming decorative pieces, such as a small river landscape executed on tin, and its companion piece, a landscape with castle. Both works were wedding presents for his brother-in-law, and as such represent a rare intersection of Anton's personal and professional lives. Another such intersection is a very dear New Year's greeting card he made for friends, August and Theresia Schell, with charming paintings of herons on the front doors that are truly works of art in miniature. With a personal inscription inside, the piece may have its roots in Bohemian holiday tradition. Anton executed a drawing for the bas-relief sculptures on the base of the Defenders Monument in New Ulm, where he once again served as storyteller about the Dakota conflict. Other decorative works by Anton include 2 interesting trompe-l'oeil pieces, both of them paintings that masquerade as bas-relief sculptures, one of a cherub holding grapes, and another of Christ wearing the crown of thorns. An Anton Gåg retrospective would not be complete without a glimpse at Anton the photographer and portraitist. From the early days of his career, he was interested in state-of-the-art photographic techniques. After his 1892 marriage to Lissy Biebel, an experiment with their wedding portrait produced an example of photographic deception that was reminiscent, once again, of paintings by Will Harnett. In such eye-fooling pictures, an object, such as the imitation of curled paper seen here, has the illusion of tactile and spatial qualities. As early as 1887, Anton photographed Lissy, on the left, who had been hired as an assistant by Julia Berndt on the right at his photography studio. Lissy had a way of putting children and even nervous adults at ease, and demonstrated talent for creative clothes design as well as posing customers in unique ways. Soon Lissy was recognized in New Ulm as a photographer along with her husband at Anton's elite art studio. He equipped his studio with the latest cameras, even worked on photographic inventions, and became well known in the community not only for wedding and family portraits but also for collectibles, such as storytelling pictures, still lifes, and documentaries of important events for sale to the general public. For a tinted photo of his friend Emma Shell Marty, he combined photography and painting skills in an expressionistic style similar to works of the contemporary Norwegian Edvard Munch. He also retouched a photo of his bright-eyed, somber little girl Wanda, as well as painting a quiet study of her in a classical pose likened to the work of the contemporary German realist Adolf von Menzel. And here a few sure strokes reveal the nature of old age with a lack of affectation. His earliest portrait, done when he was just a boy himself, may have been a self-portrait, and, as such, it was an exercise in conventional portraiture. A competently realistic, tight style that was in the best academic portrait traditions of the day, and was as popular as photography at the time. Commissions such as this undoubtedly enhanced his reputation in the community, and brought in much-needed income for Anton and his growing family. In his 1902 self-portrait, Anton's intense gaze is reminiscent of the last self-examination by the great post-impressionist painter Vincent van Gogh. Anton died 5 years later at age 49. The work he left behind for his family, community, and German Bohemian countrymen stands as testimony to the proud and undaunted spirit of this immigrant artist, Anton Gåg.